On the phone, we have a gentleman who I believe should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He played for the San Francisco 49ers back in the day during their early dynasty. We're not going to say how old he is. Former San Francisco 49er and UCLA Bruin Randy Cross. How you doing today, Randy?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm old enough to know better, Dave.
Exactly. I see that you grew up in California. Was USC after you too back then, or was it just basically UCLA?
Yeah, SC was after me. I was lucky as a high schooler. I played football and threw the shot put, so I had a lot of schools that were after me for both track and field and football. UCLA wanted me for both. SC wanted me for just football.
So then it was an easy decision, knowing how much you love track and field.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there were a few other schools out there that were willing to, like Nebraska wanted me for just football, and Alabama was willing to let me do both, as was Texas.
So when you joined UCLA, what was it like on campus?
Well, I mean, it's one of my favorite times of my life was that initial, I guess, year and a half or so that I thankfully survived. I mean, I had spent 4 years at a Catholic all-boys high school, and to go from Crespi Carmelite High School in Encino, California to UCLA and Bruin Walk was a severe shock to my system. There were more, girls in shorts and, sunbathing out on the grass, and, this was 1972 or so. So it was a fun time. It was a great place. It was we won the NCAAs 3 of the 4 years I was there in basketball. So, athletically, it was a pretty amazing place to be around. And, 2 years of Pepper Rogers were always entertaining.
I did the same thing. I went to Catholic all-boys high school, and when I went to college, everybody said, "Why do you want to sit around all girls?" I said, "I'm sick of being around guys all the time."
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, when I told my dad, when he told me I was going to go to the all-boys high school, I said, I don't want to be a priest, Dad. And my dad just looked at me and says, "That isn't the point, son."
Exactly. Was football basically taking a back seat at that time to basketball at UCLA?
I guess you could say that. I mean, there had been a time, in the mid to late '60s where, at UCLA it was pretty much an accepted thing. And football was huge, but John Wooden in basketball, I mean, they were going through a spurt where they won the NCAA championship 10 of the 12 years through that whole period. So, it was hard not to take a back seat. I think once Tommy Prothro left, Pepper came in there, and he had a couple of years where, didn't win immediately. I think it really brought football back, though, just as they were finishing up that streak of winning when Dick Vermeil came in there for a couple of years and caused a lot of excitement.
What was Coach Vermeil like?
The best. I mean, just, he and his wife were fantastic. They were great to every recruit, every guy that was lucky enough to play for Dick. I mean, he remembers you to this day. One of the great pleasures. I've been lucky enough to be around some great coaches through my sporting life. So he's one of the ones that's pretty high on the list. And ironically, he and guys like Bill Walsh and Terry Donahue and a few others have got a pretty good background together.
What was it like playing Ohio State in that Rose Bowl in '76?
It was very, very nice. We had lost earlier in the year to that same team. I mean, badly. I think it was like 42-21. So when we beat SC and won, we were co-champs, so we had beaten Cal. So we went to the Rose Bowl, and it was almost an assumptive thing that little Bruin team didn't have any chance. And I want to say we were, to put it nicely, a prohibitive favorite, easy double digits. And we pulled it off a great win. Wendell Tyler, John Shara, Cliff Frazier, some great guys, great Bruins, and it's a game I'll never forget athletically.
Did you know the 49ers were going to draft you when you came out?
Heck, I didn't even know I was going to play pro football until, I guess, the end of spring practice. My junior year, we had I guess they call it senior day or whatnot, where back then that was kind of the on-campus workout for the guys that were going to be going in the draft. So all the guys that were seniors, it was actually before spring ball started. You ran 40s and you ran drills and agility stuff and whatnot, and they got your height and your weight and whatnot. So, the rising seniors and the current seniors would work out for the NFL guys. And I had an old scout for the Dallas Cowboys, actually a former Niner coach, a guy named Red Hickey, that, pulled me aside and, he wanted to give me that, what was kind of an infamous IQ test thing, the Wonderlic, I guess the early years of the Dallas Cowboys. And so I did it. I sat in the stands in Poly Pavilion and did the test, and I got done, and I said, there you go. And he tells me, he goes, you're going to get drafted kind of early next year in the draft. And I kind of laughed and looked at him and said, oh, yeah, really? And he says, no, I'm not kidding. You're going to get drafted pretty early. And I had never seriously given it much thought.
When the 49ers drafted you, I know the draft's different than it was today. I mean, a lot of times you just got a phone call from a scout saying you're drafted. Back in the day, they found out the next day in the paper. How did you find out?
Actually, I'd been called. I was a pretty typical, though I was born in New York, I had grown up in L.A., and I was pretty much an L.A. kid, and I'd never really been around the snow much or anything else. I got called by the Cleveland Browns in around the 24th pick of the first round. They told me they were going to draft me. And the guy that was a line coach was a guy named Rod Humanick, who had been the head coach at Cal State Northridge. And he called me and said, hey, we're the Cleveland Browns, and Randy, we're thinking about picking you. And I went, oh, okay. He goes, how do you feel? What would you feel about being a Cleveland Brown? And I said, Cleveland, like Ohio? I don't think that's what they wanted to hear.
That'll cost you a little money, I'm sure.
Yeah, a little bit. That's the difference between going 23rd, 24th, or 42nd, I think it was.
When you went to the 49ers, I mean, they had their troubles over the years. I mean, since they had the $1 million backfield. What was that organization like when you joined it?
They were a family. It was the Morbidos on the team then. And, it wasn't until after my first year that the team was sold to Eddie DeBartolo, and it was very much a family-run, smaller organization. They hired Monty Clark, the offensive line coach for Don Shula's great teams at Miami, and it was an exciting thing for me. I didn't know much about the 49ers. My dad had been kind of a Niner fan by virtue of being discharged from the Marines after World War II and seeing some of the early years of Frankie Albert and them. But, they were just coming off some very strong years. So it was a team that was full of great talent, specifically on defense. And they made a trade for Jim Plunkett where they gave up their first pick. So that's why I was their first selection of the draft, but it wasn't until the second round.
The Dolphins, a lot of them credit Monty Clark for the success of that team. They said he came there and he put that line together and he knew what he was doing. Did he help you that much?
Yeah, I was only around him a year. I think I got to say he did. I was really lucky. A lot of it was motivation for me. And, he was an influence, put it that way. He sat me down and told me I was going to wear 62 like Jim Langer. And I went, okay, that sounds good, I guess. I'm just happy to be here. And he wanted all his linemen about 250, so we weren't really big. And I think he was I had come from a place like UCLA where it was all about technique, not necessarily all about, girth and strength and whatnot. So it was a good mix for me.
How did it change when the DeBartolo family took over?
Well, early on, it kind of got forgotten, but Eddie'd be the first guy to tell you that, he kind of found his legs about him. He brought Joe Thomas in, and Monty Clark was my coach my first year. My second year, my coach was a guy by the name of Kenny Meyer, who was a longtime assistant quarterback guru type guy. Third year under Joe Thomas. The beginning of the year, the coach was God, what's his name? Pete McCulley. And then he got fired after the ninth game, and Fred O'Connor was the head coach. And I think when he finally took some advice from friends and people he had known, not only around the league, but also in the Bay Area, to, let somebody that's been in the NFL that, really knows what he's doing take over and, let him do this for you. And that's when they hired Bill Walsh. So Bill was my fifth head coach in 4 years. So I was a little skeptical. I was like everybody else around there, that we all figured we'd just outlast Bill.
What made Bill so successful?
Besides the obvious, I think it wasn't until after he had passed away and been gone for a while that people really looked back and saw, not only from a football sense, because, heck, when he passed away, it had been a good while since he coached. People were still running his offense, still running his plays, still his management and organization building themes and books were still like a Bible for people. It's a little simplistic to say he was an unbelievable coach and a great offensive mind, because that would only be encapsulating a small part, I think, of what made him, one of the major forces in the history of the league.
Teams today, they always talk about, this coach, but it seems like organizations do win championships, because when you talk to former 49ers, Cowboys, Raiders, they love those organizations because it said the way they were treated. And from every 49er says they were treated like royalty. Did you feel that way?
Oh, yeah. Eddie DeBarlo believed in, it was a very simple code. He had learned it from his dad in the corporation, in the company. You paid people, you paid them the best. And as a result, that's the kind of results you expected. And you knew and you understood if the results weren't as special as your pay, there would be ramifications.
But it seemed like he never interfered with Coach Walsh, though, like other coaches or owners might do, like a Jimmy Johnson. Jerry Jones. He let Coach Walsh run the organization. Yeah,
no, he really did. But like I said, it was true of, Bill, and I think a lot of people around that building. Those expectations have a whole different weight to them. And that kind of wears you out after a while. And you saw Bill coach for 10 years. We won 3 Super Bowls under him, did a lot of winning. They won it the year after he left again, and then won another one later when basically his effects and his work as both, in the front office and behind the scenes was still being felt. But, it was a pretty grating experience from the inside out. So I wouldn't trade that whole experience for anything in the world. But, it was something you had to appreciate because, how many teams really set their goals? Everybody says they do. But, that was a team where when you lost the NFC Championship or you lost in the divisional round, your entire year was a complete failure.
When Joe Montana took over as quarterback, did you realize how special he was?
Yeah, I think so. Dave, I think we knew that from the jump. We knew that in '79. We weren't all exactly, unbelievable personnel evaluators, but it didn't take a genius to look at Joe and see the way he ran that offense and to see the just sort of the symmetry between his skills and what Bill wanted, and to know that was going to be a match made in heaven.
Roger Craig takes a lot of credit for Jerry Rice becoming the player he was. He said they took Jerry under their wing and trained him the way they trained, like running up hills and stuff like that. Did they ever tell the offensive lineman, we want you guys to train with us?
They might have invited us. I don't remember that. I don't remember any of us volunteering for that. They had a whole different idea of what being in shape was. We wanted to lift weights and work on sprints and work on short bursts and things like that, and knock around sleds. And they wanted to run fire trails and run, 200 meters and 400 meters, and that wasn't exactly our cup of tea.
Jerry Rice, I mean, you're blocking for Wendell Tyler, then Roger Craig, and I mean, you had Joe Montana, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, Jerry Rice, one of the greatest receivers. It had to be hard to lose with that much talent.
Well, God knows there's enough teams around now that have some pretty unbelievable talent that don't win the Super Bowl. And there were teams that, I can look back at those great Bear teams that still only managed to win one title, which to me is incredible for the amount of talent they had. So it wasn't all about the talent. And the AFC was full of really good teams. So was the NFC. I think the difference is how you cement that team together, how that individual becomes, 11 people become one thing on offense and one thing on defense, and an entire team and organization becomes set. And that's those organizational skills I was telling you about with Bill Walsh.
I mean, being from Chicago, I think the problem with the Bears is when they let Buddy Ryan go, when Buddy went to the Eagles, that organization, or the defense, kind of lost some of the structure. I mean, they still had the players, but again, the structure wasn't there. Buddy Ryan had those guys attacking. And Coach Ditka wasn't a great basically thinker. He was just a motivator.
Right. And that was part of, in that particular case, that was part of the problem. And everybody that you can think of from a team standpoint, whether it was the great Charger teams, go down the list, there were coaches and there were people that couldn't make that much of a difference. Mike Ditka was a great player. Mike Ditka was an excellent coach. But, that's what Bill was able to do, was the whole package. And, that's the difference between the Shulas and the Joe Gibbs and the Bill Walsh and the Bill Parcells and people like that.
Who was your biggest rival when you played? Which team?
Probably the Rams, I would think. Maybe the Cowboys eventually. We had a decent little rivalry with them. But it was probably the Rams within the division. Remember, that's back in the days when the NFL was relatively geographically impaired.
Right.
So, the West was the LA Rams, the San Francisco 49ers, the Atlanta Falcons, and the New Orleans Saints for some obtuse reason.
Did you have a Super Bowl that stood out as your favorite?
Not really. I tell people all the time. I mean, I've got 3 kids. Too, and it's kind of like picking out your favorite kid. Each one's got it stands alone, as being special. I mean, the first one was an amazing experience. We were kind of the happy dummies. There wasn't all that much pressure on us at that time. We won our Super Bowl, and a lot of us kind of lost our mind for a year or two. but the second one was the best team I ever played on in '84, when we beat Marino and the Dolphins in the Super Bowl at Stanford. That was something else. That's a team that I always cherish pretty highly. And then my last year was a really unlikely Super Bowl. Though the '89 team that won it that year after I retired is arguably one of the better Niner teams ever. But, the '88 team, we were 6-5 after 11 games. They were talking about, getting rid of the coach, making changes, getting rid of a lot of us. And somehow, some way, we managed to finish the right way and win the Super Bowl. So trying to differentiate for me is pretty tough.
Did Super Bowl 19, when you got to play at Stanford, did you think that having almost the home field advantage helped you in that Super Bowl?
I thought it was a disadvantage, personally. Because people talk about all the time when you get to those kind of games, whether it's the World Series or a Super Bowl or, NBA Finals, you find out how many distant relatives you have in life because people find you, trust me. And that was at home. And I remember, actually, we came to Bill Walsh after a couple of days of the week of the game, like on Tuesday, and said, can we go in the hotel a day early instead of going in on Saturday? Can we go in Friday? We wanted to get away because it was crazy. And I don't wish that on anybody. People always insist that, there's never been a home Super Bowl. Oh, yeah? Stanford was closer than Candlestick. Stanford was like, 10 minutes from our Redwood City facility, or the Santa Clara facility that we had. So, that was as much of a home game as any Super Bowl ever played.
Was there a defensive lineman that gave you the most trouble?
There's some really good ones. Honestly, for most linemen, there's always one guy that sort of, you don't struggle with, but from a style standpoint, it's a tough matchup. Guys that I played against that I think are unbelievable. Joe Klecko, one of the guys I still can't believe isn't in the Hall of Fame yet. I had a tough time with him. Steve McMichael from those great Bear teams, I thought was their best defensive tackle, though his teammate Dan Hampton's in the Hall of Fame. Merlin Olsen early in my career, I don't know if he was still that good or I was just that impressed being an LA kid growing up and getting the chance to play against Merlin.
Merlin was an actor. Your father was an actor. Did the acting bug ever bite you at all?
Not really. I was left with kind of a not sour taste, but a different taste about that whole, that profession. I watched my dad basically sit around the house waiting for the phone to ring. It's a tough deal, and he was a working actor. I don't know, how people, handle that business, because there's very, very, very talented, great actors, I'm sure still out there, that are better known for being waiters or, car salesmen than they are for being actors. And it's only a matter of, who you know and not so much what you know.
Exactly. It seemed like the Los Angeles Rams, all those guys went into the acting profession back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, them and the Dodgers. I think I used to get to go to Dodger games when I was a little kid because my dad, who was always, in the old Westerns, would be in that thing, either with Roman Gabriel or Ron Peronowski or, one of those former players. So we'd get tickets. It was a great connection to sports. It was even working that way back then.
What is the reason you think that you're not in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I really don't know. To me, that's a definition of something I got absolutely zero control over. I think part of it is there's a fairly wide-held belief by people that should know better that, that offense was 1,000%, just talented skill players, and that any half a dozen or so trained cattle could have played offensive line in front of those guys. That it really didn't matter, and that it wasn't a matter of the people were blocking or opening the holes. And, to a degree, we were not the most loved group in the league. So, we realized, sort of playing for Bill, playing for Bob McKittrick, our line coach, and doing some of the things we did. And if you look at it, we were responsible for a lot of the blocking changes and rule changes that came to be during the 80s and the 90s, were as a result of some of the things that, hey, we noticed in the playbook it wasn't illegal. So if you could do it, we did it. And, it became a business decision for us in that, if we had to choose between your health and the health of one of our guys, you'd be a distant second. And I think a lot of that was held against us. That's why you don't see a lot of multiple Pro Bowl linemen from those days with the Niners. I think 3 or 4 is about the most anybody was managed to get.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the 49ers Hall of Famers on offense from that time. You've got Rice, you've got Montana, and I can't think of anyone else. And you were the dominant offense of the 80s. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think eventually they may get Roger in there. And I've never had it, not that I've asked for it to be explained to me, but I would be interested to see the argument as to, why there isn't at least one of the, I guess you'd have to say probably 8 of us that were through that period of the 80s.
Oh yeah, I mean, talking to
early 90s.
You're right. Talking to Roger Craig, talking to Ricky Waters, they don't get it either. They go, okay, we won all those games. Who do they think did it? I mean, again, you had Jerry Rice, you had Montana, and you had Steve Young towards the end of the 80s, early 90s. But again, you needed blocking, you needed the running backs. They forgot about those guys.
Well, it was thought of as a tricky offense, as an offense that, they just don't know any better. I always challenge people. I said, well, do me a favor. From 83, 84 on, look at where that team ranked in rushing and tell me why it's a finesse offense. Tell me why it was all done with smoke and mirrors and we were fooling people and using the pass as the run. Look at the rushing stats. And, as a team, we ran the ball as good as anybody in that era. But, sometimes when it comes to the media, and that's what votes on it, that's who does it, perception becomes reality.
And part of the problem is now with ESPN and with the NFL Network, these guys promote themselves, and it seems like unless you're part of that team, it's hard to get in.
Yeah, I guess it's for the life of me. I've never really. I got a little involved with Mr. DeBartolo. I think that's one of the really crazy things that he's not in there. And none of us is perfect, but last time I checked, he should be right there. Like I said in his NFL films, docudrama, whatever you want to call him. He should be right there next to the other owners that have 5 Super Bowl trophies. Individual owners, of which there are absolutely none.
The Hall of Fame went to him and said, we'd like a donation for the Hall of Fame. He said, I'll be glad to give you a donation, but I don't want to do it till after I'm in because I don't want it to look like I'm buying my way in there. And now all of a sudden, the guy from New Orleans, Benson, donates the money. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets up going in the next year or two.
Oh, there'll be guys absolutely that go in before somebody that's done things that Eddie did. But, like I said, we weren't the most popular. We either won because we fooled people or we won because, Eddie overpaid us or overtreated us well, whatever. We had a lot of fun at everyone else's expense. And at some point in time, I guess people get laughs.
I think you went through what the Patriots are going through now. They've been so successful over the last 15 years that teams think that it's because you're cheating, it's because of this and that. They don't realize it's a great run organization. Yeah,
I guess there is a little bit of symmetry there when it comes to those organizations. Plus also that's never that whole Hall of Fame thing. That's not something you lobby for. I don't care how other people handle it. I agree with Harry Carson, who basically told them all to go to hell right before they all decided that, we're sorry, and they voted him in.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they can all go to hell. I could care less.
The ones
I worry about Eddie. I worry about Roger. Why guys like that aren't recognized, but I didn't care about personal recognitions when I was playing, much less now.
The ones I feel bad for are the older guys, like the Jerry Kramers, or you take the guy from the Packers. Billy Houghton was the all-time leading receiver and retired. He can't get in because he was the first head of the NFLPA, and those poor guys have waited their whole lives. Why put these guys in after they die when they can't enjoy it?
Yeah. Oh, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you ask the average fan, hell, well, the players would be a bad group to ask because they don't know anything about history of the game. But you ask most fans that are real hardcore fans, they would swear up and down that Jerry Kramer's in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, exactly. And then they put his teammate in, Dave Robinson, who just happens to be on the board of the Hall of Fame a couple years ago over him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a way to work the system.
So what do you think of the new stadium in San Francisco?
I love it. I love it. I'm happy. I'm happy for everybody involved. There's going to be a Super Bowl there. I kind of feel a little piece of me, feels bad for the real hardcore long-term fans that when these changes happen for stadiums and stuff, the NFL has priced the real fan out of the game. The one that built the game and helped them build the game, they price those people. They can't afford, $30,000 per ticket for a seat license, or even $10,000 a ticket. So it's a shame. They're unbelievable facilities, and I think that Super Bowl will be it'll be a stunning place to have a game.